So it's Lag Baomer. It's the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's the passing, the Histalkus of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And it's Yom Simchasei Shel Rashbi. It's the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's joy. In a recent Sicha of the Rebbe that I saw now, the Rebbe referred to it as Simchasei Gedola Shel Rashbi. It's not an ordinary joy, it's an extraordinary joy, a great joy. And the Rebbe is trying to extract from the extra word Simchasei Gedola additional insight and priority and so on. Lag Baomer is a very, very strange day. But it clearly has a very, very powerful energy. Who were the first people to actually celebrate Lag Baomer as a Yom Tif is difficult to know. In other words, when the Jewish people identify this date as the date of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and of course also the date when Pasku Talmidei Rabbi Akiva Milamos, the disciples of Rabbi Akiva stopped passing away, was it always known through the diaspora, in other words, for the last 2,000 years, or was discovered along the way through the HaKodesh or whatever other means, like for example the Arizal? These are details about Lag Baomer. But Lag Baomer is a true and legitimate Yom Tif, Moyed, in our calendar, whether it was revealed to us through the powers of Ruach HaKodesh or it was passed along to us through a chain of the record of history and so on. What's so remarkable about this day is that so many Jews celebrate it. And nobody really knows why. They just know this is a date to celebrate. You go to Miron, which is of course the resting place of Shimon Bar Yochai, on Lag Baomer. There's hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who camp out and spend whatever it is, the Shabbos, the Friday, the Sunday. Many of those individuals, a considerable number, are not even from. And they have this bond to this place and this time and this person. Lag Baomer is a Yom Tif that touches the heart and the soul of the Jew in a really, really irrational way, and in a really, really, really big way, in a very, very broad way. What I'm trying to say, in other words, is it's not news to any of us that the world in general, and the Jewish people in particular, have their share of skeptics. People who have to understand everything and explain everything and be able to trace the historical roots for things and so forth. It's very, very difficult to explain Lag Baomer on those grounds. Although there certainly is a credibility to Lag Baomer from a historical perspective. Like I said before, whether it was always known or it's Ruach HaKodesh is a detail. But what is true, however, is that the very fact that for so long, so many Yidden have consistently held on to this day and celebrated it and revered it and prioritized it, proves beyond a doubt that there is something very, very real about this day on a spiritual level. What that means, in other words, is holiness has a power. The holier something is, the greater its power, the more it lasts, and the broader its reach. When you encounter a moment in a calendar that has an appeal as powerful and as broad as Lag Baomer, while most of the people, or perhaps all of the people who are partaking, who are participating in the energy of this day, really, really don't understand what they're doing. It's not like Pesach, it's not like Shavuos, it's not even like Chanukah and Purim, it's Lag Baomer. What's Lag Baomer? You have to go to Miron and celebrate. Or wherever you live, you're going to cut your child's hair, you're going to make a Yom Tif, you're not going to say Tachnun, you're going to go out into the field, you're going to make a fire. The fact that these customs exist and they survived all of the tzaddus the Jewish people have had, and they of course spread across lines, Sephardi lines, Ashkenazi lines, and so forth and so on, is a clear indication that there's something special about this time. In other words, We believe in spirituality. We believe in the energy of time. We believe that the fact that people identify a certain point and celebrate it, not for a day or two or for a year or two or for a generation or two, but for so many hundreds of years, is the greatest testament to the holiness of this day. And to me, that's what's remarkable about Lag Baomer. What's remarkable about Lag Baomer is one of those times where you say the only justification for this day is Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai must have been a very, very holy man. So holy, in fact, that in spite of the fact that he lived, 1,800 years ago, and his Zohar is studied, relatively speaking, by few people, and was not around for hundreds and hundreds of years, etc., 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 etc. This man's day, the day that he himself declared a Yom Tov, touches the Jewish people on a subconscious level, on a neshama level, in such a powerful way, and elicits, it extracts such a powerful celebration because it reflects the greatness of Rashbi, his holiness, and the light that he brought into the world, and the continuing effect of his life on all of us in all times is so powerful that our neshama knows this is a day to celebrate. I know that some people would find fault with this logic, and I'm emphatically saying it, I'm dafka saying it, because I believe that this is a real logic. It's a real logic al pi Torah, and perhaps even a real logic according to the simple laws of logic. When a human being, after so many years, has such a direct effect on so many people, today he's very much alive, and he's very much alive because the holiness of this man breaks the barrier of time. It just continues. Gedolei Yisrael, the greater they are, the broader their appeal and the more lasting their appeal. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is immortal. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's greatness reaches across time and touches us. We can't explain it. We don't know why. We relate to it. Motzei Shabbos, many Yidden here in America are going to go look for a bonfire. What for? What's going to happen at the bonfire? Not very much. We're going to dance. We're going to pour Shem and Zayis if you have Jerusalemite roots, and so on and so forth. We just know that we belong at a celebration on Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's day because that's what he wants. We should be misameach. And of course, the Rebbe in so many sichos made reference to the fact that simply participating in Simchas Shel Rashbi, the great joy, the great celebration of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, is for us an extraordinary schus. It gives us a connection to this tzaddik, and the koichos and the oiros that he did and continues to bring into this world, which of course is good for all of us. We can all use all the schusim we can get, and we certainly can use a lot of light, a lot of holiness. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, perhaps more than almost anybody else, represents this light and represents this holiness. So we have this day, Lag Baomer. It's a simcha. Of course, it's a simcha also connected specifically to children, like we know from the Mittel Rebbe. This was the date people waited for all year long, for brachas for Zarachai v'Kayama, to be blessed with children. With the Rebbe, the stories of the Rebbe and Lag Baomer and children are just hair-raising, the most incredible and amazing stories. And there are so many of them. People waited by the Rebbe's house, people waited by the 770, people waited by the Rebbe mikveh when he was coming and he was going. Of course, the Rebbe always went to the oil on Lag Baomer. It was a day that so many Yeshuas, so many people in so many ways were helped. I'll just tell you two stories that are not unfamiliar, but still remarkable stories. That there was a younger man, a shliach of the Rebbe, was visiting the oil, let's say approximately 1997, 6 and 7. It's early in the morning, and in walks a fellow, clearly not a Lubavitcher, a Satmar Chassid with payas and the whole lavush, with two twins, a set of twins, bar mitzvah boys, also dressed clearly in non-Lubavitch dress, and it's early in the morning. He's not expecting to find anybody in the oil at that point, and he tells his two sons in Yiddish the Maamar, which is they should recite the bar mitzvah Maamar. And this young man is witnessing this, and to him it's interesting that a Satmar person would come before hours, so to speak, and have his Satmar sons recite the Lubavitcher Maamar by the Rebbe's Tzion. But there was something about this person that looked familiar. So later, when they left the oil, he asked him, why did he bring his children here, and so on. So he told him the story that he was married for many years, and he had no children. And he came to 770 on Lag Baomer, and I believe it was a year of a parade. And there were so many people. Everybody wanted to get to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had to go to the oil. And there was a Vada Masada. There were people responsible to keep order, and in effect, to keep people away from the Rebbe, so the Rebbe could do what he needed to do. He says, I came there, I'm a Satmar, so I know a little bit about Rebbes and pushing, and he forced his way through whatever resistance there was. The Rebbe was already sitting in his car, and he poked his head into the car and said, Rebbe, Zarachai v'kayama, I want a bracha for a child, for a ben Zohar. And the Rebbe looks at him and says to him, who will he play with? And the man was stunned, like, what kind of question is that? I have no children, I mean, who's he going to play with? So the Rebbe said, Zog Amen, say Amen. So he said Amen. And he had twins. These are the twins. And he had a playmate. They brought them to the oil. In gratitude, they should chazar and say the Maamar. And this Satmar Yid says to this young man, you know why you recognize me? Because you were the person I pushed aside to get into the Rebbe's car. He remembered him. He recognized him. He was one of the Bachrim responsible for keeping order. And he muscled his way past him, and he got to the Rebbe, and he got this bracha. But stories like these abound. A woman told me a story that she was married for many years. I don't know how many, but many. And she didn't have any children. And she had a relative who was a wise woman, a smart lady, who advised her to ask the Rebbe again and again and again. She said in Hebrew that those who persist win out, so to speak. So in the course of her marriage, let's say 10 years, she must have written the Rebbe 100 letters, if I understood her correctly, an enormous number of letters. On occasion, the Rebbe responded. Usually there was no response. And she says one year she waited by the mikveh, and the Rebbe came to the mikveh, and she's thinking to herself that there's a lot of people and that she's going to have literally 2 or 3 seconds with the Rebbe. So she sat there and she rehearsed in her mind what she would say to the Rebbe so that she can get the words out clearly and efficiently. And when the Rebbe walked by, she approached him and she said to the Rebbe, I want that my husband, and she said his name and his mother's name, and myself, my name, my husband, her mother's name, should together be Zeichet Zarachai v'kayama. The Rebbe stops, and the Rebbe tells her, Ich hab akumen alle deine brief. I received all your letters. In other words, the Rebbe acknowledged the fact that he read every one of the letters she'd sent over the years, notwithstanding that he hadn't responded. Und du wirst haben masach Kinder, the Rebbe tells her. You'll have many children. And the Rebbe walks on. She was close to 40, I believe, at this point. Anyway, she had twins. She says to herself, twins is not a lot. The Rebbe said a lot. She had one more and another more. She had 5 children before she decided that was a lot. And most of her children, all of her children were born when she was beyond the prime years of having children. And there are so many additional stories, remarkable, amazing stories with the Rebbe about Lag Baomer and children. But of course, the greatest miracle of the Rebbe and Lag Baomer and children is the parades and the children getting together and marching through the streets and being proud to be Jewish and inspiring in the children this idea that a Jew should walk proudly as a Jew and not hide it and not be ashamed of it, but to celebrate it, is something that has an impact on children that's beyond our fathoming. You know, we always think that it's the public school children who need the parade, and our own children will be better served perhaps doing something different. Every Yid and every Jewish child who lives in America and in the West needs a healthy injection of Jewish pride. And many frum kinderlach, many Hasidische kinderlach and so on are on occasion self-conscious. And the parade is supposed to rip that out of them, that they should be so proud. I'm different, and I'm very happy and very proud of my difference. This is part of the spirit of Lag Baomer parade, and it's one of those ideas that the Rebbe initiated literally as soon as it came to America, in the very early 40s. During the war years, they already celebrated Lag Baomer and made whatever kind of outings they were, but they were demonstrations. They were public announcements. I'm a Jew, and I'm proud that I'm here, and I want you to know about it. This is all part of the Simcha of Rabbi, and what lies at the core of it is the holiness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was a godly man, a holy man. He was himself a light, as the Zohar calls him, B'tzuna Kadisha, the holy candle, and he brought into the world a light. And what I mean when I say light is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's distinct mark is not his scholarship, his lumdis, his goinus in Torah, though he was that as well. He's one of the great Tanoim, one of the great disciples of the great Rabbi Akiva, on whom the whole Torah Shabbat sits, as the Gemara explains. Rabbi Shimon is contributed to the Shas in no small measure, and his halachas are found all over the Gemara and so on. But that's the chokhmah, that's the seichel. When I say the light of Rabbi, I mean literally a holy and a godly power that's not brought down, that's not diminished, it's not concentrated and diluted in the intellectual form, but it remains in its authentic holy stage. Holy state, what we call in our culture the pnimiyas HaTorah, the face, the neshama, the inner dimension of the Torah, the godliness of the Torah. This is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's domain. His person, his personality, his presence brought that light into the world. And from that light radiates all of the chokhmah of pnimiyas HaTorah, the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah and all the other Sfarim, until, of course, in our times, the Kisvei Arizal, and then, of course, the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidus Chabad, of course, until the Rebbe. This light begins in a considerable way with this person, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who brought this oyer, this holy light into the world. And as he himself says in the Sefer Zeir HaKadosh, it's with this light that Yifku B'nei Yisrael Mibei Galusa Barachim. We're going to go out of Galus. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's day is a simcha, it's a celebration. It's a celebration on some level associated with children. And it's a celebration that celebrates the Oyer HaTorah. The idea that hidden behind the wisdom of the Torah is the godliness of the Torah, the Eir Eliki, the God light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is hidden behind Chochmoseh Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And today, mitzvah mutter lefarsem zeisa chokhmah. Today, the idea that Torah, in addition to having wisdom or intellect, has a light, is something which is not only known by yechidei segula, by rare individuals, by special people, by holy people, by righteous people, by pious people, but by everybody. And today, it's a mitzvah and it's an obligation to learn and to teach pnimiyas HaTorah, whether you're learning it directly from the source, or as we have in our culture, we learn it in Teiras Chassidus Chabad. I saw a film of the Rebbe where a Yid wanted to make a Kol Keireh, a public declaration about learning Kisvei Arizal, learning Kabbalah, and he wanted the Rebbe to join him. So the Rebbe said to him, "You're free to make such a Kol Keireh, but I cannot join you, because I am a descendant of the Alter Rebbe." And the Alter Rebbe taught that the continuation of Chachmas HaKabbalah is through Chassidus Chabad. So the intellectual teachings, the philosophical/mystical teachings of Chassidus Chabad, and if I give out a Kol Keireh, encouraging people to learn the writings of the Arizal as they are in that state, I, as a grandson of the Alter Rebbe, will be going against what my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, said and held, and I cannot do it. To us, Pnimiyas HaTorah is Chassidus Chabad. So in honor of all of the above, we're going to learn a Maamar on Lag Baomer. There are many Maamarim on Lag Baomer. This Maamar is an Alter Rebbe Siddur. It's an interesting Maamar. What's unusual about this Maamar, especially when you appreciate that this is a Maamar connected with Lag Baomer, and you assume, you envisage, you would imagine that a day like Lag Baomer would have Maamorei Chassidus that talk all about the joy, and all about light, all about godliness, all about holiness, and all about transcendence. Here is a Maamar that actually analyzes the word Lag Baomer, Lamed Gimel Baomer, the 33rd day in the Omer, and links it to the word Gal. Gal, of course, Gal Einai, V'abitin Eflois Meteira Secha. Gal has a connotation of Gilui. Open up my eyes, so I'll be able to see the secrets of your Torah. But Gal also means a mound, a heap of rocks. And in Kabbalah, the Gal is a metaphor for the Parsa, which is actually an aspect or an idea in Chochmas HaKabbalah that has to do with limitation and order. So the Maamar we're going to be learning is a Lag Baomer Maamar, but instead of being the kind of Maamar that talks about the transcendence and the light, it's a Maamar that actually talks about the limitation and order and structure. And I was preparing the Maamar, obviously, I was learning the Maamar, preparing the Maamar, and I'm asking myself, how is this Maamar, which talks so much about constraint and limitation and holding back, consistent with the transcendent and the exciting ideas associated with Lag Baomer? And the Mitzvah at the end of the Maamar will talk some more about this, but at this point, what I would like to say, B'derech Efsher, is that one of the things we know from life, and one of the things we know from Torah, and one of the things we know from Chassidus, that order, Seder, things being orderly, and everything having its own place, Kol Dava Makei Yove, and everything having its own constraints and limitations and contributing aspect. When there is perfect order, that order opens up a possibility for absolute Eisav. In other words, we erroneously equate infinity with disorder, with chaos, with more than order. And on some level, there's legitimacy to that. But in a very, very different way, dafka in a place of clear measure and distinct constraint and order, through that limitation, through that balance, something which is far greater, something very, very infinite, can emerge. So to use a physical example, a human body is made up of so many and so many and so many cells. What makes the human body healthy is that each individual cell is healthy. What makes each individual cell healthy is the separation between that individual cell and the rest of the body. If the cells become entangled and too friendly, it's a very, very destructive aspect. The individuation and the separation from one cell and the next, in other words, the health of each cell as an individually contained unit, and then its interaction and engagement with the remaining cells results in order and health and longevity and so forth. So this Maamar is a Lag Baomer Maamar, and the focus of the Maamar is going to be that the word Lag is the same as the word Gal, which is a pile, a heap, which represents mystically a mechitza, a separation. And within the separation and the order we focus on, we emphasize the constraint and limitation. And what I'm suggesting is that this constraint and limitation we're describing is not meant to be the end of the story, that it remains constrained and limited, but rather because of the constraint and the order and the limitation, it creates a new possibility of something which is even higher, more transcendent. So let's get to the Maamar, let's actually read it. And as we learn, you'll see the Lag Baomer component to the Maamar. There's the Lag idea versus Gal and so on. So we begin to read Eid Hagal Hazeh Gomer. This pasuk is in Chumash, in Bereshis, in Genesis. In Parshas Vayishlach, where Yaakov Avinu, after 20 years, in Lavan's home, where he'd been deceived and tricked and lied to and fooled and double-talked and triple-talked and quadruple-talked and so forth, finally had enough, and he runs away. Lavan chases him down, he catches up to him, and there's a very, very big argument, a showdown. Peace is restored, and they spend the night. The following day they have a big feast, and at the feast they collect stones and they make a pile. And Lavan and Yaakov both swear to each other that this gal, this mound of rock, is a symbolic monument to their peace treaty. And the peace treaty says that neither will interfere with the other. I will not cross, says Lavan to Yaakov, from my side to your side to interfere with your life, and you're not allowed to cross from your side to my side to interfere with my life. In other words, they agreed to part, to go different ways, but it would be a peaceful parting of the ways. Lavan wouldn't bother Yaakov, and Yaakov wouldn't bother Lavan. And of course, Rashi adds immediately that neither is allowed to cross to the opposite side of this monument with ill intent, with animus in his heart, but they are allowed to cross to the opposite side for pragmatia, for trade, for business, for profit. And of course, Although our Maamar is not going to talk about this idea, but the idea of crossing over this mound for the purposes of profit is what we call in our culture Avedas Habirurim. There's sparks of godliness hidden in Lavan's territory. We cross over to Lavan's side to extract them. Our Maamar, however, talks about the mountain itself. And on the mountain, this mound of rock is considered a mechitza, a wall, a barrier that separates Yaakov from Lavan in an absolute way. Not in a way that allows for a subsequent crossing over, but it separates them absolutely. And in Mitzvah Hashem, you'll see inside that there's two of these. So we begin again, Hagal Hazeh game, and Lavan says to Yaakov, this mountain becomes a testimony. It becomes a witness, it becomes a monument to our peace. And what is the peace? That we would not interfere with one another. Says the Alter Rebbe, Hine bepasuk zeh yesh remez Lag Baomer. This pasuk is an allusion to the 33rd day of the Eimer. B'teira, and of course, it's a pasuk in Genesis, in Bereshis, meaning that we have a remez for Lag Baomer and Chumash, because the pasuk says b'teivas gal shebepasuk zeh v'chuli. The fact that the mountain, the hill of stone, is called gal, a mound. Using the word gal is a remez to the idea of Lag Baomer. And I'm skipping the parenthesis, which is a little bit more than 2 lines. And the Rebbe explains how this mountain, which is connected to Lag Baomer in name, because it's a gal, is connected to Lag Baomer, not only in name, but in something much, much more, and something much, much deeper, and something much, much more meaningful. When we want to understand the idea basically, Hagal Hazeh, in as much as this mound of stone was concerned, also Lavan me'avon, and Lavan made out of stone. And the reason he did it was lahafsik ben Eretz Yisrael, to demark the border that shows the end of where is Chutz La'aretz and the beginning of what is Eretz Yisrael. And the pact that the two agreed on was Shalei Yavru Mizel Azevachulu, neither would pass over to the opposite side with ill intent. So the Rebbe says this was a physical mountain and it served the physical purpose of peace. But in addition, it's a metaphysical mountain that serves spiritual purposes. The Rebbe continues and he says, Gam lamayla haya bazeh hagal. Just like physically there is this mound, similarly on high, spiritually, metaphysics, there is a similar concept of a gal, which serves as a hefsek ruchni, a spiritual barrier. Begal lavanim Ruchni, in a spiritual mountain of stone, Bein Eretz Yisrael, in the supernal holy land, L'chutz La'aretz v'chulu, to the idea of the diaspora that exists on high. Just like physically, as the Torah counts, Lavan and Yaakov Avinu made this arrangement using the gal as a symbol in every spiritual world. You have the very similar ideas. That there's a mountain which serves to separate between the concept of Yaakov Avinu and the concept of Lavan. And the Rebbe says, V'yuvan zeh, the significance of this mound, which serves to separate between Yaakov and Lavan, not just physically but spiritually, is al pi hanal, as we discussed in the Maamar before this one, in the Siddur, which we're not learning. Be'inyan kelai dois yesh heidah, there's a notion of submission, shalamat amanadas, which is less than reason. V'yesh heidah l'maylam anadas v'cholu, there's also a submission which is beyond reason, and the gal, the mound, which Yaakov Avinu and Lavan erect as a symbol of their peace, this mound exists physically and exists spiritually on a number of levels. The Hine continues the Rebbe and he says, Yesh beis madreges b'lav. There are 2 concepts of the mound spiritually, because there's 2 concepts of Lavan spiritually, and on some level there's 2 concepts of Yaakov spiritually. Aleph, the first concept of Lavan, is Anikra Levin Elyon, which is called the supernal whiteness. Who, in other words, the way Lavan exists in the highest of sources. Lamaylam b'chinas Yaakov. On this level, Lavan is higher than Yaakov Avinu. Hanikra Ba'alei Lamo Atzilus, because Yaakov is called the master of the world of Atzilus. Ki Yadua, this known from Kabbalah. While Lavan v'hu b'chinas Levin ha'elyon, or as the second pasuk says, v'neiz lemin Levanin v'chein arze Levana ki yitzibah, they're representing Lebanon. Now geographically, Lebanon is physically above the Holy Land, and spiritual Lebanon represents Chochmah Bina Lev Nun, which is higher than the world of Yaakov, which is levels of meters of Atzilus. So there is a Lavan which is higher than a Yaakov. In other words, in Kabbalah and Chassidus, the highest concept of Lavan is Lavan Elyain, supernal whiteness, which is higher than the order and the limitation and diversity of Elamatik. And then the Rebbe says, but v'yesh bechinas Lavan shalamatma bechinas Yaakov. There's a second Lavan who's lower than the Lavan we described above, which is representative of Elamatik. Yaakov Avinu was the world of Atzilus. This Lavan is lower than him. Who and what is the latter Lavan? Neged Nikra Lavan Arami is called the Lavan, the thief, the deceiver, the trickster. As the Pasuk says, Arami Evidavi, the Arami, that means literally from Aram, from Syria, tried to destroy Yaakov Avinu because he's evil, less than and opposite Yaakov, who is called by Allah Atzilus. For who ha'arma, he's the deceptive force, shemenagid lachachma, which opposes wisdom that's less than chachma. In Maamar Hasidus, when they talk about arma, they sometimes say arma is higher than chachma. Here, arma is lower than chachma. The Yaakov, the kedusha nikra avi v'chulu, Yaakov, holiness is called my father. Ukmei as the pasuk says, ani chachma shechanti arma. I, Yaakov Avinu, is called Chochmah, and my neighbor is deception. Near me, next to me, sits deviousness. She'arma, that idea of being what you call in Yiddish, not a Chocham, but an Oibe Chocham, a smart aleck. It's Shachen, Bekorev, is resting near Lekabam and Agadusha to be able to leech off Kedusha. Who, and this, Aram Yevidavi. The Lavan who is less than the Yaakov, as opposed to the Lavan which is more than the Yaakov, is Shadish, Klipas, Neged, Debris, Yetzira, Asiyah, V'chulu, is the spiritual root for Klipas that exist in the lowest worlds. So there is a concept of Lavan, which is white, transcendent of any color, transcendent of any form, which is strict Ein Sof. This Lavan, which is called Lavan Halin, is higher than Yaakov. And then there is the devious Lavan, who's less than Yaakov Avinu, who's trying to draw from Kedusha into Klipa. And the Rebbe continues and he says, how do we explain these two concepts of Lavan? So he uses an example from Tzaras. V'zeyuv, this can be explained. Mashamatzinu b'negoye, what we find by leprosy, whatever Tzaras means in Torah. Shemar ha'lavan, that sometimes you look at the color white and you say, yesh ba shakula tahira, it's entirely purifying. As the pasuk says, "Kulei hapach lavan," it's entirely transformed to white when a person is completely white. Tahiru, he's pure v'chol. On the other hand, v'yeshmar lavan shekulei tamei, there's a lavan, a whiteness, which shows on tumah. If it's not the whole body, but one small portion of the body, v'hi hanikra lavan adam demesei beheresei lavan v'chuli. I'm not translating these words because I'm really not sure what the pshat is. Or kamavur b'mishnayos the meseches negoyim are discussed in mishnayos. So there's a concept of white, which is above color, and the concept of white, which is less than color. White, which is above color, means it's so alive, it doesn't have a detail. And white, which is lower than color, means it's so close to Hepech HaChayim that it has no color, it's very, very pale. The first is Kedusha, the second is Li'um Hazeh, and both of them are Lavan. So there's a relationship between Yaakov and the Lavan that's higher than him, and there's a relationship between Yaakov and the Lavan, which is less than him. And the Rebbe says the klol is to have a way to understand the difference between the whiteness which is higher than the color and advantageous over it, and the whiteness which is less than the color, which is disadvantageous. Says the Rebbe al derech anal, we explained before, the bechinas leiven alien shalamaylo and bechinas atzilus, the Yaakov cholu, the level of whiteness which is higher than atzilus is the white of kulei tahim, of absolute purity. Klipa cannot in any way, shape, or form get life from Keser. So its whiteness is the transcendence of color. On the other hand, you have Bechinas, Lavan Atach, the lower whiteness, Shenofal B'Shviru, which is a product of the Shviru Sakelim. Misham Shulamat, and Bechinas Hatzilus Kanal, which is less than the world of Hatzilus. Says the Rebbe, who this is also a concept of white, but it's nega, it's a tzaras, it's a tumah of beheres lavanok yetze shekula tameh v'chul, which is entirely tameh v'dal. So the Rebbe says you have a Lavan and Yaakov and Lavan. You have the concept of godliness, which is beyond all limitations. You have the concept of godliness, which is already being swallowed up by klipa, And in between those two, you have Yaakov. Yaakov represents Kedusha, but Yaakov represents order, Atzilus. And between Lavan and Yaakov, there's a gal, there's a mountain of peace. So the Rebbe says, V'zehu inyan shel Hagal Avonim. We now understand the significance of this mountain of stone. She'also Lavan Harosha made. Lahafsik b'beis madregesu, to make a separation between Kedusha and Klipa, that it exists in both of the aforementioned levels. Just like physically, love made a deal with Yaakov, I won't bother you, you won't bother me. Except for pragmatia, for business, the same is true here. That there is a gal, a mound, which represents a separation in spiritual terms between Lavan and Yaakov, the higher Lavan, and between Yaakov and Lavan, the lower Lavan. Aleph, the first one is behefsek, a separation shemein bechinas leivin ha'elyon leYaakov ba'al Atzilus, between the world of Eisav, higher than Atzilus, and the order of Atzilus. V'nikra gal aid, this mound is called aid. Ki aid hu b'nei v'cholu, it's a testimony, it's a witness to the order that exists in the highest worlds. Asher ato leitav v'reila, you're not allowed to cross over to my side. I won't cross over to your side. This level of Levin Ha'elyon is so high that it is mibechinas Yaakov Anal, has nothing to do with the level of Yaakov and is removed from him. In other words, there's a level which is infinite, which is called Levin Ha'elyon, and Yaakov and Lavan make a deal that there would be no entangling of this Levin Ha'elyon in the human being, in Yaakov. Now, why would it be advantageous? Lavan is here, Yaakov is lower than him. Yaakov represents Adam and order. Why would it be not good for something to come from Levin Ha'elyon, from above it, into Yaakov Avinu? We'll see later. And then the Rebbe says, V'abeis, the thing is also true. The second concept of Lavan, which is lower than the concept of Yaakov, behefsek sheben Yaakov the Gedusha, to separate between the Yaakov of holiness. The bechin is Lavan atach to the lesser Lavan, who is Shadish Klipas the Neged de Biakanal, which is a source of Klipas, as we expressed earlier. Vogam Kened also serves as a witness between Kedusha and Klipa, but in this case, Kedusha is higher and Klipa is lower. Between them, you shouldn't cross over to my side. The deal involves that Yaakov won't hurt Lavan. Lavan won't hurt Yaakov. But the spirituality of that deal is that whatever Lavan is, that's what he's going to remain. And there's going to be no more chayes going from Kedusha to Klipa. No more vitality in life going from the realms of holiness to the realms of unholiness. V'chein, similarly, I'm not going to cross over to your side. Shalei Ove will not come, l'kabel teisvis yinika b'kedusha the Yaakov ba'alo atzilas v'chulu. Lavan says, I will not raise myself to try and draw chayes from kedusha. V'yalzeh, and to this end, ho yogal, there was a mountain avonim of stones, physical stones, which represented a physical idea, but also a spiritual idea, lahafsik, to interrupt between Kedusha and Klipa on the level of Lavan, which is higher than Ishtalshalos, and between Kedusha and Klipa on the level of Lavan, which is lower than Ishtalshalos. So if we were to stop right here, what would we come away with? That Lag Baomer has the same root as the word Gal, which means a mound. And what does the Gal do? It constricts, it limits, it inhibits. Instead of the whole idea of expanding and revealing, this Maamar sees the Gal as a constraint, as a limiting force in the spiritual worlds. And for the most part, that's how the Maamar is going to finish, although we may have some chance to add from other Maamar, but this Maamar seems to make this point. Vehu bechinas haparsa. We have an image of the idea of Lavan, which represents whiteness, beyond form, which is Ein Sof, higher than Yaakov, than our father, Ba'al Olam Hu Atzilus, as this Maamar calls him. And there's also Lavan, a whiteness which represents a lack of color. If color represents the sign of life in a person's skin, to being pale or white, represents a deficiency in that area. That Lavan is lower than Yaakov. And there are accordingly two gals, two mounds, two mechitzes, two separations, one which separates between the Lavan above Yaakov and Adam, Baal Olam Atzilas, and the other which separates between the Lavan which is beneath Yaakov and Yaakov, which is Baal Olam Atzilas. So the first, the Maamar generalizes and calls it a parsa, a screen, Beinu Atzilas leBriya, between the world of Atzilas and the world of Briya, Shenasis, that this screen is comprised Mitzerufa Yosis Harbe, from many letters, according to Kabbalah, Kiyadu, as it's well known. V'ha'oises nekrayim avanim, each individual letter is a stone. Many stones compiled or collected in a disorderly fashion is called a gal. Similarly, yesh parsa, there is also a screen, in a way which is similar to the aforementioned, which is bein elamatayu, between the world of Eisav, higher than Atzilos, Adam, Yaakov Avinu, Baal Elam Atzilos, the Leivan Ha'elyon, the supernal whiteness, lebechina satik, and the Yaakov, to the order and the balance and the integration, which is Yaakov Avinu. You see, there's Maamar about Alter Rebbe on Lech Lecha, on the Parsa, and I believe that we learned those Maamar. I'm not sure, but I believe that at least one of the Maamar that talks about Parsa we learned in these classes, and you can check it out and learn about it at length. I also believe that in the Pasuk Eliyahu, which we learned, which is Vayera, there's also something about Parsa. Kabbalah has many concepts of tzimtzum, of diminution, of making a light less. On a higher level, there's a greater light. On a lower level, there's a lesser light, and so on. But there are different processes through which the diminutions take place. The most obvious, most basic word that we associate with these diminutions is tzimtzum. There's light before the tzimtzum and the light after the tzimtzum. There's higher tzimtzum and lower tzimtzum and so on. And there's a lot of particulars about tzimtzum, especially the idea of tzimtzum harishan versus the subsequent tzimtzum and so on. But another concept of reduction, which Kabbalah employs, is the word parsa, a screen. And in this case, it's gal. What's the idea? So I don't have time for a very long and involved analysis or study on this concept, but I'll give it to you very, very briefly. Chassidus talks a lot about words. Words are vehicles of communication. I cannot talk to you without words. So words are very helpful. Words are like stones. They're dead. They have no life. The meaning and the value of a word, for most of us, most of the time, is what the words carry, which is ideas. You put letters together to make words, words together to make sentences. Individual letters have no meaning, words have meanings. Individual words have little meaning, sentences have greater meaning, and groupings of sentences have greater meaning still, and so on. So the letters carry the ideas. They deliver the ideas from one person to another person, from a higher level to a lower level, by allowing the light of the idea, the spirit of the idea, or the soul of the idea to be carried by those letters. But there's a rule. And the rule is that the letters have to represent the idea correctly. For example, if I wanted to say the word bracha, beis, reish, chaf, hey, I have to say it in order. Each letter by itself, the beis separately, the reish separately, the chaf separately, the hey separately, has little meaning. The tziruf, the joining of these letters together, and the order of these letters gives it meaning. Words, letters, therefore, deliver. They reveal and deliver. We do learn in Hasidus, however, that words are also not a perfect medium. In other words, when I communicate to you, with words, they deliver some of my thought to you, but they also complicate, they also diminish. Words reveal and conceal, or reveal by concealing. When I'm telling something to you, I'm telling something to you which you're able to relate to. Things you're not able to relate to are hidden behind the mask that the words represent. So simply speaking, words, communicating ideas, the most orderly of fashions, reveals ideas from a higher level to a lower level, but at the same time it reduces them. Now imagine this. Take words that add up to sentences and so on, which communicate ideas, and scramble them. disorganize them, disconnect a sentence from a sentence, disconnect a word from a word, disconnect a letter from a letter, what do you have then? You have a mess. You have letters that once joined with other letters in an orderly fashion to properly represent and present the ideas. By ripping these sentences and words and letters apart, we're left with a mess of individual letters that by themselves have virtually no meaning. This disorderly idea is called in Kabbalah parsa. Parsa means a screen between a world and a world. But parsa is the kind of a screen between a world and a world that categorically and absolutely changes the light from its pre-parsa condition to its post-parsa condition. That means, in other words, a tzimtzum also diminishes light. But tzimtzum diminishes light like orderly words and sentences, where when you look at the lower world, which is the world that's been tzimtzumed, and you look at the higher world, which is the world pre-tzimtzum, you see the hishtalshalus, you see the gradualism, you see how this brings to this. But when you have a parsa, which means to say there's a body of words that are separating one world from another, but instead of representing the ideas, they're so disorganized that they don't represent the ideas at all, the light which will emerge in the secondary world, in the second world, will be what's called in Kabbalah, ha'ara de ha'ara, oir shel tulda, ha'ara nedelis, denoting all of those expressions and many others denote the incredible distance between the higher world and the lower world. In other words, in Kabbalah terms, you would put it this way. Atzilus has ideas, thoughts. Bria has, from those ideas and thoughts, letters, individual letters. The Beis and Elam Bria used to be a part of a word, which was part of a sentence, which was part of a paragraph, which represented meaningful godliness, being brought from a higher level to a lower level. That's been torn asunder, it's been torn apart and completely disorganized. And the light which comes from the higher world to the lower world is so diminished that it's representative of each individual letter by itself without the order and the advantage of tziruf. That's the concept of parsa in Kabbalah. So as you can obviously sense, parsa is a far more severe allusion to tzimtzum than is tzimtzum. And gal is a parsa. This mound of stones, says the Maamar, based on the Sefer Yetzirah, is a mound of disorderly stones. Stones represent letters. If the letters were organized into words and sentences and paragraphs, it would be not a galavonim, a mound of stone, but something very, very different and far more meaningful. So the mound of stone represents so severe a divide between a world and a world that it's called Eisav, is built in this misudaran, that what transmits from one world to the next is completely insignificant, is categorically lower than it was in the higher world. That's what the concept of parsa is. Here we have this concept, and it's representing an interruption, a mechitza. You cannot go from Ein Sof to Atzilus. There's a gal. You cannot go from Atzilus to the beginnings of Klipa. There's a gal. But you see, it's not that the gal is only allowing a certain amount of light to transfer from higher to lower. But in this Maamar, the gal is categorically cutting off the higher level from the lower level. That's what's unusual about this Maamar. In this Maamar, the parsa is not seen as something which covers much of the light and allows a diminished version of it to emerge, but rather it cuts the light off altogether. In other words, this Maamar is a Kabbalistic Maamar that accepts the literal version of the pasuk. Lavan says to Yaakov, I won't trespass, you don't trespass. The Kabbalah is saying what's higher than Atzilus, and Atzilus will not trespass. What's Atzilus and lower than Atzilus will not trespass. They will meet at all. So let's read. There is Yaakov, he's Atzilus. Above Atzilus is the whiteness of Ein Sof. And we know that a little earlier in our parsha, we have what's called b'maklas ashrasa, the sticks of Yaakov Avinu, ulefisha also machshev halavan, which, as we know, he peeled part of the bark away from these pieces of wood, and underneath the bark there was white, alamaklas over the sticks, and therefore v'himshich gam bebechinas halavan. Yaakov brought forward from the whiteness asher bebechinas hatikun, tayu, pardon me, which comes from the world of Ein Sof, l'tikun, to bring it into the world of order. In other words, Yaakov was guilty of linking Loiven Ha'elyon with Atzilus, the Loiven Ha'elyon which is higher than Atzilus. And Atzilus, as represented by the white which he exposed on the sticks, which he partially peeled, to bring down from Eisav into Atzilus. And therefore, now Lavan says to Yaakov, okay, no more trespassing. Amen. Saf, your Atzilus, do not take from me. Be happy with being Atzilus, do not take from me Saf. Le'ed vehefsik, as a witness, as a monument, an interruption, shaloi yamshech eid v'chulu v'dal, that you'll never again ascend from Atzilus to Ein Sof to draw more light. Very interesting concept, and I think strange concept. Now we're going to skip the next 7 lines or 8 lines from Ach all the way until the line that begins with the word V'nasim, which is a little bit more than halfway down the column. V'hine. Continues out to that, but V'hine. Forgive me, let me interject here. Just as we explained that there is a gal that Lavan and Yaakov both negotiate and agree to, that Ein Sof, which is higher than Atzilus, and Baal Olam Atzilus, which is Yaakov Avinu, which until that point Yaakov had been stealing from Lavan, there would be a separation. The same is true the other Lavan, the Lavan which is the source of Klipa, and Yaakov, which is Adam, Baal Olam Atzilus, would also be categorically divided, that no life should go from Kedusha, from Atzilus to Klipa. And again, normally we see this gal, this parsa, as allowing through a trickle. Not in this Maamar. This Maamar says it's an absolute cut. There will be no chayas going from Kedusha to Klipa. And now the Rabbi adds another detail. Once we accept that the gal is a parsa, and in this case the parsa is an absolute mechitza between Ein Sof and Atzilus in the lower world, the Rebbe now goes on to connect it not only to the day of Lag Baomer, but to the Sefira of Hayit Shebahayit. All of us know that every day of Sefira Ha'omer represents the perfecting, the working on one midah. The first day work on Chesed Shebachesed, the second day Gvura Shebachesed, and so on. The last day is Malchus Shebemalchus. According to this order, Lag Baomer, the 33rd day in the Omer, which would be 5 weeks and 5 days into the 5th week, is Hayit Shebahayit. So the Rebbe is now going to link the concept of Gal, of this mound, which categorically separates. In other words, doesn't separate in a way that allows a little bit through, but separates absolutely with Hayit Shebahayit. And here's how he explains it. Ikir siyum ugvul makayma hefsek. We understand that there needs to be a barrier that's unbreachable, that's going to separate Ein Sof from Kedusha and Kedusha from Klipa. And it's called a Gal Shalavonim, a mound of rocks. Mokaim ha'hefsek, lifnei Gal Ha'avonim Hazeh, which is the place of the interruption, in as much as this mound of stones is concerned, says the Alter Rebbe, it's in the level called Hayit Shebahayit, which is the Sefira of Lag Baomer. Why? Ki b'chinazu, this level of Hayit Shebahayit, hu seif hagavul the Kedusha Lamal, is the end of the border of holiness that can resist falling into Klipa. Umisham v'hala, everything lower than Hayit Shebahayit, say for example, Yossi Shebahayit, Malchus Shebahayit, Chesed Sheba Yossi, and so on. Says the Alter Rebbe, Yechela Machetzeinu L'Kabel Yanika, Klipa can draw nourishment in such a way that the parsa could never resist it. Also by Yaakov, we find in the Chumash that Yaakov was affected by Klipa. Even after this gal was made. Like it says in the Pasuk, Vayiga b'chaf Yerav Yaakov, the Malach of Eisav touched the thigh of Yaakov Avinu. Lefisha b'yerech zeh, because in this thigh, kvar kol koyach, the force, the power of Kedusha has been diminished. B'chinas ekir midas, so the midas as they exist on a primary level, and therefore Klipa could continue to draw from there, the place where Kedusha can fortify itself and prevent Klipa from getting all together, ends with Hu Bechinas Hayit Shebahayit Dafke. So there's a very interesting concept, or a strange concept perhaps, that really needs to be studied and explained and analyzed. What does it mean? I don't know what it means. But if we accept, we presume, that the greatest midah is the first midah, chesed shebechesed, the most generous, the most open, the most available. And the weakest midah, the midah that gives the least, is malchus shebemalchus. And you're gradually going from the greater to the lesser, chesed shebechesed being more, gvura shebechesed being a little bit less. So this Maamar says, the lowest level of kedusha, which can resist giving klipa anything, is hayt shebahayt. After hayt shebahayt, the resistance, so to speak, breaks down, and in spite of this parsa, in spite of this gal, some kedusha will come into klipa. So in other words, we're seeing the midas from a perspective that the greatest gift from Hashem is the greatest midah. When Hashem gives less, it's a lesser midah. Hayt is representative of God giving very little. Why? What is hayt? Hayt is stubbornness. Why do I have to be stubborn? Because I'm not enlightened. Hayt shebahayt, which means stubbornness within stubbornness, denotes, to use a Tanya term, emuna shebe'emuna. There's no enlightenment, there's no understanding, there's no spirituality. It's faith within faith. In other words, completely reduced to the most simple and most basic state of relationship to Hashem. I don't have any richness, I don't have any enlightenment, I just have an acceptance, a stubbornness. Hayt shebahayt marks the end. So the way we would look at it is that even a person who's lost much of his inspiration, but he can muster akshanas, he can muster inner strength to be stubborn about his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even if it's hayt shebahayt, in other words, he doesn't even have an enriched or an enlightened stubbornness. The stubbornness itself is stubborn without any enlightenment. That individual can resist mingling with liyum hazeh, with klipa. Lower than hayt shebahayt doesn't have that power. And I'm now going to 3 lines in the bottom of the page, please. Hagal Hazeh, this mound, hamafsik, which interrupts and does not allow chayes to go from kedusha to klipa at all, achar shekola, is placed at the end of koyach, of the strength, ikir bechinas gufa the Yaakov, the primary concept of the body of Atzilus. In other words, bechinas hayt shebahayt, the interruption, the parsa that says, do not trespass, nothing should go from kedusha to klipa, is after hayt shebahayt. That's where the curtain must be to separate bagala with the mound of disorderly stones in the presence of klipa. They would be able to get nourishment after hayt shebahayt from the body of Atzilus. After the end of the midah of hayt shebahayt, which was discussed in the previous Maamar, which we didn't learn. Now we continue 4 lines to the top of Chin Hey Amadal. We just discussed the parsa, the gal, which is between Atzilus and lower than Atzilus. There is also the curtain and the screen which separates Shumitinu from the Eisav v'chulu gamkein, also disorderly letters, Eisav biltim mesudarim, bein bechinas hatehu, dinikudim, between the world of Taihu and bechinas hatikun, which means to say there's also a parsa between Eisav and Atzilus. And according to this Maamar, before Lavan and Yaakov made their deal, there was an easy access between Taihu and Tikkun. The result of Yaakov and Lavan making the deals, this was interrupted. And who bechinas hahoid shalamaylam anadas. It's also a concept of hoid, but it's hoid which is higher than reason. And the Rebbe says v'yuvan and yonei barichas b'samach. I'll explain it in the next Maamar, which we're also not going to learn. So according to this Maamar, what does Lag Baomer represent? A cut, an interruption. But not only an interruption that does not allow from Kedusha to Klipa, but an interruption that does not allow from what's higher than Kedusha to Kedusha. So where's the celebration? Exactly what's exciting about that? We can all appreciate that a mound which separates Kedusha from Klipa can serve a constructive purpose of not allowing Klipa to get. But we also know that the idea is not just to stop the flow from Kedusha to Klipa, but to retrieve, to take back from Klipa into the realms of Kedusha. And according to this Maimer, the Gal, the Parsa, is altogether cutting off Klipa from Kedusha, unless, of course, you say that you're allowed to cross the mound for the purposes of Avodas HaBirurim. But more importantly, what does it mean that there is a Gal which interrupts from Teot Atzilus? Isn't it good that Tikkun should get more godliness from higher than Atzilus? And yet in this Maimer, we are celebrating Lag Baomer as the day of divisions, of interruptions, of separations, and so forth. This is what this Maimer says, and this is my curiosity. Now, I have to be honest and tell you that I don't know the answer to what I just asked. It seems to me that the spirit of Lag Baomer is antithetical to the spirit of this Maimer. The only way I can understand it is, as I told you in my introduction, that when you make these separations, you force order. You limit everything, you put everything in the correct place. And within Seder, within order and limitation, there is a possibility for ultimately revealing a much, much higher concept of Ein Sof, something which is even greater. In other words, disorder seems to allow for a merging of infinity and what is finite. And that's true to an extent. But ultimately, disorder is destructive. When you have absolute order, the Ein Sof, which will ultimately merge with the order, merges with the order in a constructive way, in a truly tikkun way, and as a consequence, it lasts and is preserved. But I'm not sure. This is just a thought. And now the Maimer finishes. Ubekol zeh muvan. This Maimer is an insight that provides where you see the theme of Lag Baomer represented in the Chumash itself. And it is B'tevas Gal Pasuk Zeh Eida Gal Hazeh V'Gamer. It's this word Gal in this Pasuk in Pashas Vayishlach. V'hu mitam. The reason the Torah alludes to the concept of Lag Baomer all the way back into the Chumash, Shabiyim Lag Baomer, the day of Lag Baomer is made by Bechinas Heit Sheb Heit Kanal. Represents Heit Sheb Heit. Stubbornness within stubbornness, which is the last level of the Neshama, which has the power to be complete, a complete master over itself, and not allow Klipa to draw anything from it. Ukvar kol sham keich hakedusha, and it's the level where holiness in its quality and its richness stops. Al kain tzorech lahafsik, you have to make an interruption. Hanikra gal kanal, which does not allow Klipa kedusha to come into Klipa. So again, the idea that we're going to, so to speak, extract from this Maimer is that this interruption creates an order. When Klipa exists within its own limits and doesn't get any extra chayes from Kedusha, it stops being Klipa, it disappears. And ultimately it allows for a greater order. But the Parsa, the Gal, as this Maimer seems to be describing it, seems to be very, very limiting. And the Maimer finishes with something else. This explains when Lag Baomer Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. Rabbi Akiva's students died, why? Well, we all learned the Gemara because they had issues, they had problems. It says that Rebbe not so simple. They may have had issues, but the issues resulted in Klipa drawing life from them. If you interrupt Klipa's access to the richness of the light of Atzilus, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped to die because the deficiencies that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim have do not allow for Klipa to schlep life from them to itself. Ki nifsak machitza zu, it interrupted this separation bifnei hamakateg aleim, before the critic over them v'chulu v'dal, and Klipa could no longer take from them. So here you have a very original or different idea. If Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim died because of a mistake, because of a sin, separating Kedusha from Klipa should exaggerate their sin. It should make them look worse. Because when you have a mix of good and evil, so evil doesn't look so evil. But when you totally separate out good from evil, and good is here and evil is here, and they're separated, what is on the side of good that's deficient becomes overtly deficient, becomes explicitly, becomes clearly deficient. So this Maimer is saying something different, which leads you to believe that, at least in the version of this Maimer, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were tzaddikim. And as far as Kedusha is concerned, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim should never have died. Klipa was able to find the kind of deficiency in Talmidei Rabbi Akiva which would justify drawing Talmidei Rabbi Akiva to itself. But when you interrupt the flow, or the permeability, if you will, between the world of Atzilus and Klipa, Talmidei Rabbi Akiva determined to be tzaddikim. Which means to say, it's impossible to say that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were perfect. Because if Talmidei Rabbi Akiva were perfect, the Klipa couldn't touch them. But it's also understood from this Maamar that Talmidei Rabbi Akiva's infractions were so minor that they're included in the realm of Kedusha, and Klipa should have no business with them. The only reason Klipa was able to draw the life out of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva and cause them to die is because there was no parsa. There was free access. Klipa was able to take not only chayes from Kedusha, lower than Hoyche B'Hoid, but above Hoyche B'Hoid. And by being permitted to take chayes from above Hoyche B'Hoid, he was able to draw life out of Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. When the parsa was erected, this became impossible, and Talmidei Rabbi Akiva's chesreines were included in Kedusha, as opposed to being allowed to fall into Klipa. That's how this Maamar finishes. So this becomes another very unusual and original idea, where this Maamar seems to be saying that Rabbi Akiva's students' liability and guilt was very minor. The fact that it brought about Hepech HaChaim was more about Klipa than it was about Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. So forgive me for doing this. Let's repeat. Here's a Maamar that says Lag Baomer is written in the Torah. What does Lag Baomer? What is Lag Baomer? It's godliness and holiness and Kedusha and Kabbalah and Abshem Bayechoy and light and joy and all the rest. And what is the Torah's allusion to this date? That it separates higher worlds from lower worlds, Kedusha from Klipa. And it seems inconsistent. It doesn't seem to fit. So I explained to you what I think this Maamar means, but I want you to know that in so many other Maamarim, when they talk about the same Gal and the same Parsa, they make the opposite point. And the opposite point is that ultimately the concept of Lag Baomer is that although there is a screen that separates the higher worlds from the lower world, safe call safe, when you have a light which is high enough, Gal Einev Abitin Flois Mitera Secha, a high enough level of godliness can permeate even that parsa, even that mound, even that separation. And to the contrary, Kedusha can be brought from a higher world into a lower world. But as far as the Maamar is concerned, the Maamar is a Maamar. As far as we are concerned, as far as Lag Baomer goes, for us, the concept of Lag Baomer is certainly a day of godliness and holiness, and perhaps B'derech Remez, we can incorporate what we learned in this Maamar into our godliness and holiness by making the following point. And that is, to so many of us, when we become happy, we become reckless. We become free and expressive of our emotive, lose discipline, control. And it can even cross lines of halacha and tznius and so on. And here's a Maamar that talks about Lag Baomer and says that the distinction of Lag Baomer is that you can have such a glorious day, such a joyous day, a day filled with light, and yet have a complete mechitza, absolute control, that the joy is free and expressed on the one hand, and that the boundaries, the borders of Kedusha and tznius and what's appropriate is preserved absolutely. And that's certainly a lesson we could learn from Lag Baomer, and we can apply it every single day of our lives.